So Bogdana Rakova, who I'm going to call up, feel free to give a round of applause. I feel like we need gifts or something, but if you want to sit right there. Don't blush as I read your extensive, impressive bio. So Bogdana is a senior trustworthy AI fellow at Mozilla Foundation. She is an engineer, researcher, inventor, and organizer. Her work investigates the complex issues at the intersection of people, technology, trust, transparency, accountability, and social and environmental justice. Previously, she was a research manager at Accenture's Responsible AI team, so I think you know this space as well. So next, we're going to bring up Dr. Rachel Gillum. Let's give it up for Rachel. And please, if you haven't chatted with them, chat with them after. They're all extremely involved, always speaking and writing and leading on these incredible issues. So Rachel is the Vice President of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology at Salesforce. Also, you know this building. Where she and her team work to ensure Salesforce technologies, including AI, uphold basic human rights and make sure that they're not used for harm. Rachel leads the team's global policy team and manages the company's Ethical Use Advisory Council, a group that involves the United Nations, Freedom House, academic institutions, and much more. So really excited to have Rachel here. And last to join us, we have Chris McClean. Let's give it up for Chris. Chris is the global lead for digital ethics at Avanade. Chris is responsible for driving the company's digital ethics fluency and internal change, and for advising clients on their digital ethics journey. Previously, Chris spent 12 years at Forrester Research, leading the company's analysis and advising for risk management, compliance, corporate values, and ethics. So now, without further ado, we're going to get this show started. So I think to start us off here, I know I have a lot of fun with this. I think I watched a lot of Price is Right, you know, growing up. So I feel like we need some prizes. We don't have prizes, Bobby, but if you don't mind starting us off here, just to kind of set the tone, right? We're hearing a lot about responsible AI, but I think it's good to have like a baseline, because you hear a lot of different definitions. So Bobby, if you want to start us off, like what would you say when you're talking about responsible AI, what do you mean?
Yeah, that sounds great, and I really appreciate this question. And for me, I feel responsible AI, it's a lot about responsibility.
Oh, wait, let me just, sorry about that.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Yes, this sounds better. Hi, everyone. So great to connect with you, and fascinating to be in person again. And I really appreciated the way you opened up with this conversation about the community and coming in together in person, in conversation. And really, that's for me like responsible AI. It's creating spaces where we could have this multi-stakeholder and really diverse conversations about algorithmic systems, and especially the applied aspects of some of the cutting-edge research, right? What does it mean in practice when teams and companies and individuals use this machine learning models and open source machine learning models, right, in particular applications, and really contextualizing the impact. And I'm coming at it really from the perspective of also movement building and social justice and environmental justice, and really thinking about the systems within which we exist and within which our work operates in the world, and really appreciating systems of injustice, and really thinking deeply about how algorithmic systems that we're contributing to or using every single day might be contributing to that, and what can we do to oppose that. Yeah,
lovely.
Thank you.
Rachel, we'll have you continue.
Yeah, thank you again for...
Oh yeah, we'll just turn that on.
Thank you again for having us. It's so great to see everyone here, all these faces. So, it's a great question. It's something that we at Salesforce think a lot about. We really think that the benefits of AI should really be accessible to everyone, but it's not enough just to provide the technical capabilities of AI, but needing to make sure that it's safe and it's inclusive for everyone. And so we have a lot of practices built in to really put that into practice when we're developing and deploying our AI, and responsibility is actually at the top of that. And we have a framework where we really put human rights at the top as we're thinking about, the stakeholders and the impact and the things we want to mitigate against. We also think about privacy and being, careful, taking care of that data that we're entrusted with, and we also think about things like accountability, transparency, really empowering the end users to know how to use it responsibly, and being inclusive and making sure we're really, taking a holistic view into thinking about the risks and bringing in diverse voices into developing it and, building in those protections too, so.
Wonderful. Chris?
I think I got that mic. Yes. So for me, my jurisdiction is digital ethics. So AI is a big part of that, but Avanade works on all kinds of technologies. So for me, when I think responsible AI or responsible tech in general, it's thinking first and foremost, why are we building this technology to begin with? Like, why is this AI system going into place in the first place? And then what are the potential impacts that this technology could have on people, on society, or on the environment? And then from start to finish, that is design, development, implementation, operation, disposal at some point, we're making thoughtful, ethics-based, value-driven decisions. So again, from start to finish, we're thinking about those impacts. We're mitigating potential harms and risks, but we're also accentuating the ethically positive outcomes of those technologies as much as possible.
Wonderful. And then to make the flow a little different, Chris, I'll start you off for the next question. Obviously, we've heard a lot about responsible AI in the news lately, and then just even companies like Salesforce taking a lead on some of the hiring around it, and Avanade as well, and then Accenture, and you see certain companies come up a lot, Microsoft as well. But we want to dig into that a little bit, right? So Chris, from your perspective, where's this coming from? Why do you think companies are really increasing some of their hiring around responsible AI? And I say that with a little context because there's always a lot of concern that, how do we make sure that it's really impactful? How do we make sure that it's not tied in more with the communication side? How is it truly impacting the end product, end result? So from your standing, what do you take that?
I mean, there is the cynical side, right? I don't know how many people have the red or how many have the blue name tags, but the cynical side, which is sort of where I come from, and the risk and compliance background, is that companies really only ever make decisions to behave better because of either risk management or compliance, right? The government or some authority said you have to do this, or somebody said, if we don't get this right, we're going to face fines or lawsuits or reputation damage. And so they say, okay, we'll get better. We'll change our behavior in some way. I think that's most of what's happening, right? And then you see companies that are responding to their customers. And then you start to see, okay, there's an optimistic view, which is people actually do kind of want to do the right thing. They just don't always know how, right? So you see companies that are building these teams to say, what even is fairness, right? What is social justice from the point of view of technology? So people that want to do the right thing are saying, okay, let's build these capabilities, and then they're starting to see benefits like employee satisfaction goes up, or customer loyalty or customer satisfaction also goes up. And so there's the business benefit to it, but there are those people that I feel like are trying to do the right thing. They want to. But of course, there are also people that are driven by regulation and risk management.
Rachel, I'll have you take that question because obviously, Salesforce, especially for the department you're in, that got a lot of press when that started, 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm curious from your standpoint, why do you think companies are motivated right now to hire some of these newfangled types of roles?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have a lot more to add than what Chris said. I think there's a multitude of factors. I think one thing I'll add, in addition to the stick of regulation, is also just like civil society is playing a big role in holding companies accountable when things do go wrong and calling that out and really trying to, protect human rights. It's coming in this, these risks coming in these different forms. So I think there's a big role for civil society and university researchers to play there and applying that pressure. That gets to the brand reputation. But I love the point you made that I think a lot of companies and leaders want to do the right thing, but it's a big investment. I'm grateful that Salesforce, Mark Benioff, really had a vision and wanted to start this office and make this investment. But for a lot of small companies, startups, that's a big cost. And so I think a lot of folks would really welcome more rubrics or sort of best practices. And that's why I think gatherings like this are so important, and organizations like this to start to share that knowledge so that it becomes something that more companies can adopt and build into their processes.
Well, I mean, just to kind of dig a little bit on that, Rachel, what do you think companies are looking for? Like what types of guidance? Because you're mentioning like gatherings like this and what can be kind of learned or gleaned from it. Do you think people are looking for like best practices, or where do you think companies are really trying to kind of navigate?
I mean, frankly, the more operational and detailed the instructions can be, the better, just because I think in a lot of companies, if they don't have teams dedicated and trained to think in this way, they're sort of, you might have engineers and product folks that are just saying, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And so I think to the degree we can get to operational directions, that's best, but I know that's complicated because everyone's product is a little bit different, the application is different, so I don't know if that's possible, but to the degree we can move from principles to really practical application, I think the better.
Yeah, very well said. Bobby, you have anything to add on that about why companies seem to be accelerating in hiring in some of these responsible AI roles?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Rachel, really for opening space for the role of civil society in this, which I feel that civil society, investigative journalists, academic researchers, right, have a tremendous role to play to really illustrate like some of these injustices happening because of the impact of algorithmic systems and really call companies to account. And I feel that this public scrutiny is becoming a bigger motivation, and really thinking about what is a sufficient level of human oversight and who's the human that we want to have oversight, right? And like at the end of the day, what does that look like in practice, right? And I see that a lot of companies are looking to actively collaborate with academic researchers and be at the conferences where people are discussing these fairness, accountability, and other challenges, and really be an active voice in co-creating this field together. So I feel that's maybe also for me like a motivation for companies to open up spaces to engage with these other kinds of actors.
Well, I guess, Bobby, if I could dig into that a little bit, you kind of pose an interesting idea, right? Because something I've heard a lot, and when you think about even debates that have happened with like Timney Cabrew with Google, not too long ago, there seems to always be a little bit of tension between kind of like the academic side, which AI ethics can fall under. Because if you think about somebody who's a professor, there's a tremendous amount of academic freedom. But if you contrast that with a company setting, there's this night and day sometimes in terms of like your flexibility of what you can say and do. So how do you kind of navigate that tension? Have you noticed, because you've had a lot of different roles, right? You've been associated with Harvard Brooklyn Klein Center, and now with Mozilla Foundation, which is kind of the in-between with the Mozilla Foundation and owning Mozilla, right, of the nonprofit, for-profit. So what kind of insight have you learned in your own background?
Yeah, thank you for that, and really bringing attention to these tensions, right? And really, when I was working at Accenture, literally downstairs, like in that corner, great view. But and I was literally the second person on the responsible AI team, and we were tasked with, I think very similarly, I was really grateful to be in a company that very early on wanted to be part of this space and like be engaged in these discussions around responsible AI and like what frameworks, both sort of socio-technical, right, thinking about social science, and not only kind of technical solutions, like how do we co-create this kind of impact assessment frameworks. And one of the biggest tensions for me was public scrutiny. Like I would get that feedback internally that what I'm proposing for us to do is like too much risk, right? So I feel like what you were saying about thinking about that risks from different perspectives of like when you work for a technology company or when you are a researcher or wanting to get into this space, like it's important to think about like the risk of those around you that you're sort of working together with in this work, and kind of factor that in maybe not necessarily, like people just need space to explore these questions, and I feel this is where the community is like incredibly important to kind of create a sort of a safe space to explore this question without getting this public scrutiny necessarily.
Yeah, very well said. I think there's probably a lot we can dig in later on with the mixture and just kind of conversations with people about how you have those spaces, because I hear that all the time. It's like, how do we have these tough conversations? How do we have a sandbox to really kind of explore? Because a lot of this is not clear. There's a lot of unknowns. But now is the point in the conversation where we want to get to know everybody on stage a little bit more. At Altix Human, that I'm with, the nonprofit, we focus so much on kind of the career side of it as well, like the idea that there's so many backgrounds that should be involved. And we get asked frequently around every role that all of you have, right? How do you get these roles? So, Rachel, we're going to start with you. You have a fascinating background. You've kind of worked on the governmental side too, and then even in your role right now with Salesforce, having all those kind of like connections across those sides of government, industry, academia. Take us back a little bit, though. What's your background? How did you get this role at Salesforce? Like, what was your kind of academic background? I'd be curious about your skill set of why you think it kind of led you to be on stage today with us now.
Yeah, because I wasn't trained as an ethicist. So that, that's, I think everyone you meet in this field has a slightly different background because it's an emerging field. But for me, yes, I started in government. I worked in the intelligence community, so had some experience, understanding of different technologies used for surveillance and in the national security space, which was really interesting. I went on to get my PhD at Stanford, shout out to my Stanford people I met earlier, in political science. I did international sort of relations and was actually studying the impact of those, the unintended impact of some of those, mass surveillance systems on particularly minority communities in the United States and how it sort of shaped their experience. And so in that way, I sort of touched on some of these issues, again, not really with the ethical framing as I thought. And I ended up meeting Condoleezza Rice at Stanford and ended up working for her for about 6 years. She has a consulting firm that advises big businesses, mostly in the US, but their operations around the world. So I ran the tech portfolio, so I got to work with a lot of big tech companies, understand what CEOs are thinking about from a strategic perspective, geopolitical risk, what is Putin going to do next, how do I enter China, not get tweeted by the president, and how to, all kinds of interesting things, but it gave me sort of that link between geopolitics and business and emerging tech, and some of those hard questions and judgment calls, frankly, that companies have to make all the time. And so when I came into this role, it sort of touched on a lot of those aspects, sort of emerging tech, having a good understanding of what could go wrong and how bad actors can use technology. And I think that's an important skill to have in my role, so you know what you should be mitigating for, and then also just understanding some of those geopolitical dynamics, just because these companies are not operating in a vacuum in the United States. You have to think about all your audiences around the world and how, there's different human rights concerns and issues around the world. So just really having that broader perspective, I think, really contributed to me being able to take on this role. Wonderful.
And if I could highlight one of your points, because I think it's really, really important, because I hear it come up very frequently in our conversations that we have, is, as you talked about, kind of understanding the bad actors. So I'd be very curious, since you have your background in intelligence, when I think about that, you would be surrounded by bad actors, right? Whereas when you think about a traditional kind of tech founder, they're thinking usually of best case scenario, right? And when we think about the rise of social media and how it would kind of lead to, Arab Spring and early on to where it is today, right? So that's always a debate underneath it. Should we focus on the best case scenario, or how bad actors can exploit the positives of technology, right? So Chris, I'd love to find out a little bit about your background. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, this will be the 20-year journey. So I don't recommend it, but just a quick background, I guess. So I started off in marketing and PR. And 20 years ago, this was sort of e-commerce was getting its start, and a lot of the tech firms that I was working with were very focused on information security, privacy, and risk management. So you might remember like Code Red, NIMDA worms, and everybody was worried about the internet shutting down. So my job in marketing was trying to articulate to executives all the bad things that could happen with technology. So I definitely had the red badge on. And so I think quickly got bored of PR, and I moved into market research and consulting with Forrester Research. And for 12 years there, I led their practice around research and consulting for risk management, compliance, corporate social responsibility, really helping companies build programs, processes, policies, and technology to manage those programs. And I just gravitated toward ethics because I feel like The ethical challenges in comparison to compliance and risk management are much more complex, they're much more interesting, and I think much, much more urgent for us to deal with. Those are the things that are really going to come to bite us if we don't take care of the ethical challenges. So I got a master's in business ethics, continued to do some of that work at Forrester, and then 3 years came over to Avanade to do digital ethics full-time. And then about a year ago, just started a PhD in philosophy, specifically focused on applied ethics to kind of bring that perspective into the digital ethics work that I'm doing.
That's terrific. All right, Bobby, what about your background?
Yeah, thank you. So for me, coming from computer science background and machine learning engineering, I was 4 years in the job working at Samsung Research at an innovation think tank team. And I was realizing how a lot of the machine learning modeling that I was doing, there was no space to explore questions around fairness, discrimination, and stuff like that, right? Around just purely the way that the machine learning model operated in the world. And thinking about global companies releasing these like big models, and really I was just genuinely interested in these questions. And I started going to the academic conferences where people were doing this kind of research already. And particularly, I'm really grateful for this group called Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency of AI, or FACT. And it's just been incredible seeing this grow within this kind of academic research community. And then I started just being an advocate for that within the tech company I was working at, and trying to like organize people internally to like read the papers. Like I literally started a reading group, and I was just bring in these kind of papers, like non-intentionally, like to discuss, right, within the working group, and then like slowly, like getting people to start thinking about these questions as they're doing the machine learning development. And then I wanted to learn more from people from other fields, and I think this was for me like the biggest kind of breakthrough was to seek out intentionally collaborations with people coming from different disciplines. And I did this program called Ethics and Governance of AI at Berkman Klein Center at Harvard Law School. And interestingly, I remember when applying for that, I wasn't sure, is it using AI in governance or it was about governance of AI? And maybe this comes because I'm like originally from Sofia, Bulgaria in Eastern Europe, and just relating this back to my own context in Eastern Europe, people trust AI way more than they trust other people. It's just the nature of like corruption in some countries. And it's just the reality even today, right? So I was thinking about, like what does it mean to overtrust technology, right? And especially some of these challenges that I feel many of the people in this room relate to. And then like most recently, like working with civil society has been just incredibly amazing to have like-minded people around me to really support me in this work. And I see some of them here, and it's just so incredible. Thank you.
That's terrific. That's terrific. So for our next part, we want to kind of find out some advice, right? So everyone, raise your hand if you are involved in the responsible AI type of space. All right, so we got a bunch of people. And how about raise your hand if you are looking to get more involved in the responsible AI? Wow, okay. So we're speaking to the latter right here. So Rachel, let's start with you. What advice would you give? Because to your earlier point, everyone you talk to in this space has a different kind of background or different pathway in. I always, when we talk to people, they always say, oh, I have a nonlinear career path. And I talk to the next person, I have a nonlinear career path. I'm like, well, I guess everybody in the space kind of has a nonlinear career path. It's almost typical to be atypical. But what advice would you give to somebody right now to kind of go on what Bobby was saying, this kind of intellectual curiosity and kind of nerding out on white papers, right? Getting involved in community, getting plugged in. From your own perspective, from what's worked on your end, what would you say to everyone looking to get more involved?
It's a good question. I was going to say something like, you need all the interdisciplinary experience, all that, but I think in very practical terms, like being places like here, talking and meeting folks here because, at least from my observation, a lot of these jobs have different titles across different companies, and they're kind of niche roles, and just being plugged into the community and knowing when those roles open up and what they're actually called, so you know how to, when to apply, you know how to reflect it, you know, the skills they're looking for in your resume. I think just really practical things like that. I think it's important to invest in networking and getting to know folks who are in this field or looking to be in this field. I think is a really practical first step.
Well, as we see, we have a lot of people who want to network. So Chris, what about you for your own advice? Because I know in this space you probably get asked this question a lot.
Yeah, and I would say both sets of comments were great. I love Bobby's comment about having space and networking. I feel like the people that I've met in this industry, this discipline, compared to others that I've been in, are so open with their time and energy and want to have discussions about how to bring in more people, because we need not just brilliant data scientists or software engineers. We need people that know marketing and communication. We need people that know sociology that can help us with things like equity and social justice. So we need all these different people, and we're very, like, as a discipline, I feel like we're very welcoming. And the only other advice I would say is definitely subscribe to All Tech is Human newsletters. The job board's fantastic. And then I guess carrying on what Bobby said is, very specifically, think over the next week or two about conversations you're going to have with colleagues, with friends, with family. Pick a conversation and dig deep into something you care about, right? Maybe it's accessibility, maybe it's fairness, but start to learn more about that topic. And the more you surround yourself with people that are interested, the more you talk about it, you're basically creating a network for yourself. You learn about it, and then for me, the sign of success is when people start to ask you questions about it, right? They see you as a source of knowledge or experience that you can help lend your knowledge to their project or to their pursuit. And for me, that's the mark of success in this space.
Very well said, very well said. Bobby.
Yeah, thanks. For me, the first thing that came to mind was something I feel very inspired by one of our VP of Global Programs at Mozilla, Jay Balbalota. They talk about this notion of making the radical the mundane. And I feel very inspired around that, like kind of having radical ideas and being questioning everything, right? And being able to kind of having that critical thinking and learning, like having the intellectual curiosity from other fields, and then being able to let those opinions go as well, right? Like, and being able to learn and evolve them.
If I could just add, it's not my story to share, but my colleague Kathy Baxter was like our first person on our team before our team was formed, and she was actually a user interface researcher and just continued to be interested in this area of AI ethics and the field, and did some research and was networked, and she ended up creating her own role as our first AI ethicist before our official office was even formed. So just to your point about being curious and reading and learning, maybe within your organization you can kind of actually spearhead a practice inside. So,
well, I'm glad you said that, because we did interview Kathy Baxter for an earlier report we did, and I remember that from her interview, just that kind of idea, and we've seen that frequently, that people sometimes go in through a side door and then expand out through there. So like maybe responsible AI is a small part, and then it builds up through just relationships and some of the work that they're doing and presenting at conferences, things of that nature. All right, for our last question, and then we're going to get some audience Q&A, so start thinking of some questions you might want to ask everyone. And again, lots to talk about, so even when we close that up, please just, this is an open conversation, right? We're here to have connections and a mixer. But for our final question before the kind of Q&A, Bobby, we can start with you. When you look towards the future, I know it's always hard to predict the future, but where would you want this field of responsible AI to be in 5 years, or where do you think it would be?
I love this. And for me, it's really about thinking about centering on the margins. And we talked a lot about diversity and underrepresented groups and their experience with algorithmic systems. But yeah, what does it really mean to center on the margins? And what does it mean to center on contestability and the ability to question the algorithmic outcomes? And what does it mean for social justice and environmental justice and other more broadly algorithmic justice movements? And really seeing this kind of growing community of practitioners that are really uplifting those questions and the voices of people who care.
Very well said. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think there are two answers. One is what do I expect and what do I hope for? So what do I expect? I think this space is going to look a little bit like privacy did maybe 10 years ago. So now privacy by design is fairly well accepted. Not completely integrated, but fairly well accepted. We do have big GDPR and privacy laws around the world. And I think that we're going to see something similar with responsible AI. We see obviously the proposed regulation in the EU. We see like New York and California and Ohio, doing some things with regulation, but it's still kind of scattered in the US. That's what I expect. It's going to look like privacy. What I hope for is that we take from Bobby that perspective of these issues that are more important than technology. Like, how do we start from a perspective of social justice and fairness and belonging and sustainability and think of those ideas first? And then when we introduce tech into that conversation, we can start to think, how does tech support these values? How do we use tech to achieve these outcomes? Rather than saying, we're going to build this really cool AI, and then after the fact, shoot, we should go back and think about social justice. So that's what I hope for, but I expect it's going to look more like privacy. In 5 years, that is.
All right, Rachel, take us home with looking into the future, responsible AI.
Yeah, that's all, I think, pretty accurate of an expectation. I think just to build on and try to not repeat too much is that I do hope to see just more mature function, a more normalized. What's radical now, like we see it in more companies, it's coming at the front end of the design stage, not tacked on to the back end. I would love to see more of that right now, and just like a more community of support. I think right now we have informal conversations among folks in industry anyway, and a few folks in civil society, but just to really have more of that sharing of best practices and really spreading our learnings and knowledge and how to get this done, especially in an enterprise environment. So.
Very well said. So before Q&A, I want to give it up a round of applause for Chris, Rachel, Bobby. Thank you again for doing this. And thank you all for...